Greetings to the Caron YouTube audience, day or evening. Greetings again to those of you who are here with me in the room and anybody watching on live stream. Come on down, join us. We just had inspirational music to get us started, and I feel it in my blood. I'm grateful for those who participate in the various ways to make chapel happen. I mentioned last week that I follow heroic story literature, and to think about whether that's a right correlation. Anyway, I want to recall a scene from a movie probably many of you know, and talk about the movie I'm thinking about is the movie Titanic. And near the end of the movie Titanic, Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio are having their final moment there. She's on a piece of floating debris from the wreckage, and he's hanging on. And it's like this tragic departure. And I don't know if you know this, but there's this whole thing that's gone on beyond that about people who have gotten pieces of driftwood that big and said that he could have fit on the thing. And there's science around it. There's this big, should she have let him get on the thing instead of watch him freeze and drop into the depths? Which I'm going to use that in this message here today because, let's see, this is the second Sunday of Advent in a countdown to Christmas for those who identify under the traditions that we think of in the broad umbrella as Christian. Today is the third day in the 8-day festival of Hanukkah in the Jewish tradition. Today is also moving towards the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. So I always drive up early on Sunday mornings and I keep watching, where I see the sunrise on my drive is different every day, and to be honest, it's hard for me. The shrinking of the length of daylight is something I struggle with, and I really look forward to. But that's part of the dance of this, and these festival seasons in the northern hemisphere take advantage of the theme of light in darkness as part of their essential message. And another thing that's happening today, one of the reasons that you'll hear is there's all this complex stuff in my mind, and I want to toss it up on the wall here before I use it. Today happens to be a day at which at 7 p.m. around the world in the 24-hour time zone clock, people will gather at various places and light candles for an organization called Compassionate Friends. And Compassionate Friends is a support community for people who have lost children or siblings. And not necessarily to addiction, but surely many have been lost to addiction. It's a tough crowd to have to be in. You don't need compassionate friends, but people do. And if you think about it, if you're a family that has lost a child, or if you lost a brother or sister, it can make holidays so much more difficult. Holidays can be difficult anyway, but so in and around all of this stuff, my chapel topic for today is salvation. And I sometimes use other words for that, but I'm going to use the word salvation on purpose and try and head right into the complexity of that for me. It's an important topic, theologically, and it's a great topic to talk about in terms of Caron treatment centers and the work ministry that we have to help rescue individuals and restore them and help families sort of recover from the way addiction sort of poisons family life. So salvation is a need, right? And we have two things that I think of in the work and probably there are a bunch of people in the room probably who have at least one of these experiences. I know that, and maybe both. So first I wanted to talk about Narcan. And I guess you know what Narcan is. But Narcan is this thing that has made Lazarus, for the seemingly dead come back to life, almost a kind of an ordinary thing. If you talk to law enforcement officers or firefighters or whatever, many of them on the front lines are being called to overdose scenes, and they have the Narcan with them. Or many people, if you can get Narcan, if you don't have it, you might want to find out if you could get some in your home. I'm not saying a lot of us don't even know that our loved ones are addicted, or you may come across anyway. It's a life-saving medication. And it it's extraordinary with what it does. The sad counter to that is that I've had patients here who now are like, I've had 3 overdoses or 4 overdoses, and then Narcaned, was a verb, back a bunch of times. Whereas previously, often, if you survived 1 overdose, it was miraculous. And like, so sadly, I think people are becoming jaded around this and like thinking, they're using to the point of the precipice, thinking one of their friends will interrupt the thing before they die. Okay. Second thing that looks life-saving in the work of this place around the world is just an admission to detox. Because the person's life is careening off the edge, and we're like, what are we going to do? And then all of a sudden there's an intervention or whatever, or somebody finally has a wake-up call, okay, I'll go. And you bring them to here, and when you bring them to the front door, and you do the admissions process, and then you leave, your hope is that there's been a rescue. You hope that this is going to be salvific. And, but here's the thing. You kind of can't get past the overdose event without the Narcan, and you can't kind of get past the addictive crisis without some acute intervention. But it alone is not what brings about this amazing thing, which I'm here to tell you about, which is sustained long-term recovery. Sustained long-term recovery is an incredible thing. It takes a person who was trapped in this horrible experience and gives them, I have a friend and colleague who uses a phrase I'm going to borrow today, lives of good purpose. Takes you from lives of not great purpose to lives of good purpose. It's like I remember when I was a kid and we used to have matchbooks, and in the matchbooks there would be commercials, and there would be like some guy like I said, you could send away for the build yourself up in 30 days, you'd become like Popeye. And this is the before and after. The before and after of recovery is what I want to have in view. And I'm an example. I, in 1988, my entire life was failing. In 1989, I was blessed to have the beginning. No Narcan, fortunately, but I've entered the journey of recovery. And here I am now 34 years further along on that journey. I'm still learning. I really am. I'm still changing. And part of me is so grateful for that truth, and also I kind of figured by now, I'm married to this wonderful woman, and I think she's like, really, you're still going to go to a meeting? But what's happening is that I continue to invest myself in recovery. It continues to provide me harvest. So, and I love being of service. So I'm just not going to quit, honey. I'm going to keep going. So it's worked for 34 years. I don't want to jinx it. Okay. This is not for her, by the way. But, and I don't think she usually watches, but if she does, please tell me. Okay. There's the camera. Anyway, get back on track. This sustained recovery thing is not brought about by Narcan. It's not brought about by admission to detox. What is salvific in the life of an addict? Well, now it becomes a really interesting, now we could have a long conversation, but I want to jump tracks for a minute, because when I was a boy and a young man, I used to hear about people and the topic of salvation within the Christian world. It's a centerpiece of Christian faith, and in the Catholic tradition, it's not talked about quite as exactly in the same way as it is in the Protestant world, but in the Protestant world especially, there's this big emphasis on whether one has been saved in the Christian journey of life. If you don't know that, but it's a point of emphasis. And one of the things I think, I used to ridicule it, but I think that's because of something deeper. I suspect always some part of me knew that I was not okay. And so when people would talk about this thing that happened to them, I was dubious, and I'm sad about some of the ways I've come across to people over the years that I've since hopefully repented from and learned to handle differently. But I was really a jerk to people. Like, I found Jesus, and He's like, was he lost? So, yeah, smart aleck. But when this happened to me, the sustained recovery began to emerge. What happened, I began my recovery through 12-step support. I was attending 12-step meetings. I got a sponsor. I started reading the 12-step literature. I started working the steps. I started becoming, it's like acquiring a vocabulary and a set of practices and becoming conversant in a way of living. It's not just a way of addressing addiction. That's the thing that many people don't understand, is that actually the 12 steps are kind of a way of approaching one's life. And I was having a great conversation with my brother on the phone the other day, and I was talking to him about how I'm suddenly applying the 12 steps in some other area of my life. And he goes, Jack, it mentions that. It says practice these principles in all our affairs. I'm like, yeah, I know, James. But I forget that it's a way of life. I think it's more about the rescue from the drugs and alcohol specifically. It's not. This is where I'm going. I want to talk about salvation as a progressive thing rather than as an instant thing. And so, as I mentioned, this happened to me. I find myself suddenly, I'm making tracks in my journey of recovery. I'm going from needing more help to needing less help because all of a sudden I know I can take myself to meetings, I can work with my sponsor, my marriage at that time, I was in my first marriage, but it started like functioning better, and I'm a better friend, I'm a better employee, I'm doing all this stuff that's really great, and the 12-step people are telling me, a higher power did this for you, and find a power greater than yourself, and I'm like, oh no, it's the Jesus thing. And because I really was resistant to it. I identified it as an atheist, and I had a block there. But here I was experiencing a profound rescue. Here I was experiencing a transformed existence. And eventually I was able to put those two together and get past my whatever that was and think, okay, in my way of understanding, I've actually been saved from what was awful. I was going to die or end up in institution with a wet brain, or have my liver implode, or end up in jail, or whatever, which are the ends that were clearly ahead for me. I had multiple arrests, and I had bad biometrics, and I'm from a multi-generational addicted family, so like the cards were stacked against me in this process. And all of a sudden, here I was like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year sober, 2 years sober, 3 years sober. And along that period, the first 3 years, I began to be curious about faith and spirituality and God. And as you might guess, I've had quite a transformation about that. So, at 3 years in therapy, I told my therapist, a lovely man named Ted, I just ran into like 6 months ago, which was awesome. I told Ted I was thinking about quitting my job and going to seminary. He didn't blink an eye. It's just like, I totally see you doing that, Jack. He had gotten to know me, and when I told my family, they were like, what? Because all of a sudden the intellectual atheist was going to become a Jesus freak? Like, what? And I'm sorry, if you're like passionate about your Jesus-ness, I'm picking on you today. I know that. But we're going to get to a good place here. So, I mean all of this in the best of intention. And it's my story, so it's where I was. So, at 3 years, I started thinking about seminary. At 5 years, I left my job in the small family business that I was a part of, and I went to seminary. But when I went to seminary, I was still like seeking, I was still searching, understanding. That was my project, was to discover about God, rather than because I knew I was ready to preach about it. But all of a sudden I'm a student pastor, and I remember telling my first pastor mentor, I was like, I don't even know the Bible. And he was like, here's 15 passages, memorize them, and that's like a good start. So I got to, and I've come a long way in that too. Anyway, when I got to seminary, I enjoyed the study of the subject of salvation. It's a very well-developed area of theological pursuit. And what I wanted to say to you all is not to talk about that per se, but just to share with you that what I've discovered over many years, including in seminary, is that there's a continuum of things you discover if you are curious about salvation, which is the one thing that you can find, and you can find it on late night TV, is you find people who are dogmatic about salvation. Like, it's the thing, and it's available, and you can do it, and here's exactly how. You say this prayer, and you give your heart to Jesus, and all of a sudden you're granted entry into eternal life, and if you don't, you're in trouble. And this is offered as if it's completely cut and dried and completely clear, and all you have to do is read the book, and it'll completely make sense to you. And then if you go instead to the academic route, and you ask theologians who have PhDs and tons of study and read Hebrew and Greek and all that sort of stuff, like, is there more to this story than that? It turns out there are like bunny trails and rabbit holes that you can go down of how it would be possible that this one individual's life, death, and resurrection and ascension to heaven could be salvific for any other person at any place in time, much less every other person in every place in time. So it's a deep area of study, but I cannot tell you that in all that study I found the one right person. And there are people who sort of think, oh, I like, the atonement or the propitiatory sacrifice or this Christology. And in fact, there's a big fancy word called soteriology, which is the study of salvation in Christian teaching. And by the way, there are other religious traditions. So I could be spending time talking about Judaism, I could talk about blah, blah, blah. But I have a purpose to get us there in a limited amount of time. So, let me offer the theme statement that I came up with for myself in this message, which is that salvation is a blooming mystery, not without methods, but rarely accomplished alone. That's what I believe. I believe that it emerges, and if you want to totally understand it, you might be pushing it. And but it's a thing. People do have these rescues from near sure and certain death to flourishing in life. And I believe the ancient stories are bearing witness as much to that as they may be to the particulars of eternal rescue or whatever. I'm sort of waiting to cross that threshold to figure out how much of those promises will in fact materialize in ways that I can understand as a material being trapped in time. But I have to tell you, I've experienced death to life change here. I was asleep and now I'm awake. I was blind and now I see. I was deaf and now I hear. I was imprisoned and now I'm free, which is the things that the Jesus testimony is what salvation is supposed to look like. And all those things metaphorically have happened in my life. It's awesome. And unfortunately, I think we live at a time in a society where people want the instant change. They want the instant fix. They want to be able to just transform an existence like this into an existence like that. And so there's a big, sub-narrative going on in the world of addiction around people who are using the hallucinogenic drugs as if the thought is that a hallucinogenic experience may be guided by some shamanic or therapeutic accompaniment person can induce recovery. And they go to Peru to take this medication called ibogaine, or they go to Tucson to retreats and take this other medication called ayahuasca, or now the government is funding these incredible amounts of studies with this use of this medication that I took as a recreational drug user, psilocybin. And recreational drug user, that's a terrible phrase. I was an out-and-out addict, and I would take anything I could get my hands on. But I used psilocybin as one of the chemicals that I used. The fallacy of that is I think it is one quick fix thinking. And it may be a very helpful intervention, but if this is what, so for example, people have tons of credit card debt and they reconsolidate a loan, but they don't learn how to change their borrowing behavior, and you talk to them 3 or 4 years later, they have the reconsolidated loan, and then their credit card balances are back up again. You've all seen, many of you have seen this in your journey of trying to change behavior, right? You make this big pledge, you're going to do this one thing, and this is like New Year's Eve resolutions. They wither away, and the next thing you know, you have people in February, much less April or September, with their New Year's resolutions. Many people cannot even tell you what their intention was. The objective here is the sustained recovery. And there may be instances that look and feel very much like life-saving rescue, that initiate change. But it's a long game, not a short issue. And so it's the journey of being and becoming saved, to talk about like a philosopher. It's an unfolding reality that continues to manifest through. I like the blooming notion. It's like a garden, and like a perennial garden where the flower keeps reflowering and coming and coming and coming. This year I have a work apartment here in Pennsylvania, and I don't really put a lot of plants in it because of various reasons, but I bought a chrysanthemum because I saw it and I was like, oh, I want that thing. I have a chrysanthemum in my place here, and it's still solidly in full bloom. I have no way of explaining how or why. It's like my little miracle plant. And except it's not, it's like, and I think that's what you have ahead of you, and you don't know it. You may have come here with a Eeyore, woe is me, and you may have admitted here as a patient and thought, but many people who find that experience part of their journey will bear witness later to the arrival at this place as the spark, the moment where an unfoldment of an entirely radically beautiful and different thing than they could have ever known to even anticipate has taken place. If I sound like I'm offering exaggerated promises, I promise you I am not. Because we see it here every day. The music that you just heard, that guy who just sang, he was a patient here. He told me that. And now he's staff. He's gone the whole journey. He's gone from acute care and crisis to sustained recovery with an autonomous thing, to a feeling of wanting to give back, knocking on the door of this organization saying, hey, can I be a part of this? And that's this full circle. It's a beautiful thing. And it continues. Now Craig continues to give. And he gave it to you this morning. I hope you could feel it. I just thought it was like so alive. And if you came in with, I have pixie dust right to throw out. Just feel the magic. Let yourself believe. Yes, we do have a reading that remembers the Compassionate Friends folks, and sometimes the end of the story is dismal, but it doesn't have to be for you. Because you're here, you can stop the madness. You can find your way to be a Craig, to be a Jack, to be, there's people around you all over the place, to be, and in that way to function as a beacon of light in the darkness for others. So, thank you so much